Is there a
Okay, so
I don't know. Okay, never mind.
the plug there was a bit far. Oh, just one.
Yeah. But it's not on. That's right.
Oh, Christ, okay. It's okay, I'll edit that later. It's fine.
All right, welcome to the quarterfinals of the TLS University's School Debating Championship 2019. Congratulations to all teams for making it this far. On the motions of introduce race as a mitigating factor in criminal sentencing, I'd like to invite the finalists to Avinash.
The side of government proposes to you a world where racial prejudice in the criminal justice system is mitigated and it is more fairer for people of racial minorities to gain justice. So what is the burden that side government is going to prove to you today? We are going to prove to you how with this introducing race as a mitigating factor, we're going to reduce racial discrimination in the criminal justice system, which eventually will make it fairer for people of racial minority to gain justice. So let's what is our policy, right, that we are proposing in today's debate? So I think the first stage of what happens in the courts, such as deciding whether or not the said person is guilty or innocent, will still be enacted the same, right? So the court procedure and everything will still remain the same. Only the second part, where once you have decided a person is guilty or not, but once you have decided a person is guilty, the deserving sentence, to decide the deserving sentence, only then will we take account race as a mitigating factor, along with other mitigating factors that exist in today's courts, such as the financial status and mental health, etc., etc. So what's the problem in today's society, right? So in status quo today, racial profiling already happens in the criminal justice system, right? So for example, cops pull over random black people in the USA. So which means that there is already an existing stereotype that let's say black people or other racial minorities are criminals. So this is problematic because this means that the criminal justice system in and of itself already disadvantages minorities, right? Because the odds are stacked against them of getting a fair justice sentence. So what does side government achieve in today's debate is that by proposing this race as a mitigating factor, we balance the discrimination that people of racial minorities face in court. And but even if, let's say, white privileged people choose to take this to their advantage, we will still prove why. We still tell you that when white people do use this to their advantage and say that they are privileged and take this to their advantage, it will happen on a much larger scale and makes it easier for us to call out. But we will elaborate on that later. So moving on to my arguments. So first argument, why is race principally aligned with other mitigating factors in the criminal justice system today? So mitigating factors are things that people can't choose, right? So it means that they don't have a choice in it, and therefore it affects them whether or not they want to. So things like this, such as their economic status, such as their family, such as their mental health, and etc. Right? So let's take an example of right? So if a poor person steals food from a shop, right? So obviously on both sides we agree that this person is guilty, right? But what's the difference between the sides is that on our side there's a mitigating factor which we take into account. In this case, it is economic status, right? So although we agree that the person is guilty, we still analyze how malicious the intent was, right? And this is important in the criminal justice system because it then therefore decides the sentence that this person deserves, right? So based on how malicious the intent was and based on the damage caused, then we can see how what sentence this person deserves. And we see that sentence given in courts usually range, right? So let's say from 5 to 10 years, and it's within the choice of a judge to choose. And this is why we think mitigating factors are really important. So now coming back to this motion, right? So why is race? Why should race also be one of the mitigating factors along with those that I've said already? Because people cannot choose their race, right? Just like economic status, just like other stuff that also affect the crimes that they do, right? So what does this mean? If they cannot choose it, so considering that they cannot choose it, race also plays a part in the lifestyle of a person, right? So let's say if you are a racial minority, if you are a racial minority in a country such as US, then of course the society will discriminate you. It'll make it harder for you to get a job, etc., right? So you will still face problems that race brings to you, right? And this is the thing you cannot choose. So this is why, just like economic status and family and mental health, it still deserves to be one of the mitigating factors, as people cannot choose it, and it does affect why you did that crime. Therefore, it should affect the justice that is served out to the person. And so if opposition has to prove why this race is not a mitigating factor, just like economic status and mental health, because I've already proved to you that it should be one of the mitigating factors, as it is something that is the same. So moving on to my second argument, right? Why changing the mindset from the criminal justice system itself rather than the people on the ground is more effective and works at a faster rate, right? So let's analyze, right? So it's very hard for you to change the mindset of the people on the ground, right? Let's say law enforcers on the ground, such as police, so they are racist. And it's two reasons why it's very hard for you to change their mindset, right? Firstly, is because it's impractical to change such a large population of people on the ground, right? Because there's so many of them, which automatically makes it hard for you to change your mindset. And two, they already have a mindset instilled in them that that makes them racist, right? So for those two reasons, it's very hard for you to change law enforcers on the side. So this means that when a police brings a black person into court because they are racist, and even whether or not they have evidence, this means that on our side, we make the criminal justice system reformed to take into account the racist structure, right? The racist structure, such as the racist policeman. So, but another benefit of this is that people on the ground, law enforcers, they are supposed to respect and look up to the criminal justice system, right? So they're supposed to enforce their laws. They're supposed to listen to what like the Constitution says, right? So if the criminal justice system itself changes to provide less discrimination towards the racial minorities, it also means it has a higher chance of people on the ground, law enforcers on the ground, also changing to follow changing to be less discriminatory towards racial minorities, right? But let's say even if they don't change their mindset, at least we provide an avenue for people of racial minorities to announce their truth, right? To spread the truth of what they're actually going through, right? Like the discrimination that they face, like in job opportunities or just socially, right? And whereas on their world, they're just shut down because people are racist, and then they just blame them for not working hard enough. So this is why it's better for racial minorities on our side, and this is why Gov takes the debate.
Thank you.
You have Nash not doing white. I don't know if you can opposition.
Some opposition concedes to the fact that in status quo today, courts are some courts and most courts are biased, right? Judges are biased, and there's a lot of racism and there's a lot of racism in status quo, especially in courts, and especially when it's to do with justice, right? We see that side government poses us with a question, asking us why race shouldn't be a mitigating factor, right? Well, we think that the reason why race shouldn't be a mitigating factor is because there are already other mitigating factors that are already existing and are aligned with race, right? Such as economic status and mental health, as side government has already proposed. We think that there's no reason for valid or justified reason for committing a crime just because of your race, unless you're defending yourself, unless a black person is defending themselves from a white police officer or from a police officer, right? So this is why we think that race shouldn't be a valid mitigating factor. Now, most of my rebuttals will be integrated into my substantives, right? So firstly, on why I'll be proposing 2 arguments today on why we think this motion is will be more detrimental to our society and to the justice system, right? So on my first point about how on side opposition, we prefer a world where how long you stay in jail and your criminal sentencing is solely based on your crimes and not based on if you're black or if you're white or if you're based on your race, right? We see that is that a POI?
Yeah.
No, thank you. We see that most of the time. We see that most of the time in courts, there's a lot of racism and bias towards the minority, right? Such as black people in the USA, right? We know that these kind of things exist in status quo, and side government thinks that if we introduce this policy, if we introduce race as a mitigating factor in criminal sentencing, that this somehow balances the discrimination in courts, right? But we see that this is not the case, because we see that. Let me give you an example, right? When this is implemented, let's just say that a black person and a white person both commit the same crime on the same scale, right? Both of them beat their wife, right? And we see that now when the police get to know about this, right? Now this black person can say, whoa, because I'm black and I'm facing oppression, I can be punished way less and have less time in jail, right? We see that this is not what we want in today's society, and especially in justice, especially in justice laws and in courts. We think that it's incredibly detrimental when this happens because racism stays stagnant in courts, and we think that this is a harm that side government brings to the justice system. So overall, we prefer a world where how long you stay in jail and your criminal sentencing is based off solely because of your crimes and not on your race, and how this does not balance the discrimination in today's courts. Now, secondly, on since this is introducing a sort of this is introducing a new way as a mitigating factor, right? What is our alternative, right? We see that in today's society, we know that status quo isn't perfect. We know that racism occurs to the minority, to minority races. We do concede to that. But our alternative is defending status quo right now. Why? We see that, sure, racism still occurs in courts, but we see that the world overall is changing, right? Most judges, the reason why racism occurs in court, the reason why judges make these biased decisions based on your race is a lot to do with the age and the background of these judges, right? Most of these judges are old and come from conservative backgrounds where they're taught that, when they grew up with the stereotype saying black people are the ones that will steal, black people are the ones that commit all these crimes, and that white people are more superior to them. When obviously this is not the case, right? We see that the reason why there is so much racism in countries such as the USA, which is also the country where racism in courts are most prominent. The reason why there's so much racism is because of these judges and their conservative backgrounds, right? And we think that because of their conservative backgrounds, they have more of a bias towards specific races. Saying that white people are the good ones and black people are the bad ones. But we see that obviously these judges will retire, right? And that new judges will come. And that new judges will come into court, right? We see that these new judges that will come are will most likely be more liberal because we have a more liberal because we're in a more liberal society now, right? We see that these new judges are more likely to be less conservative, and when this happens, judging will be more fair and less biased, right? And that these judging and these criminal sentencing don't just follow certain stereotypes. But even if these new judges that come are still conservative, let's just say there's this new judge who is still as conservative as those old judges, right? That still have this specific bias towards white people over black people. Even if this happens, we see that when in status quo right now, when the public hears about these court cases, right? These court cases where it says, oh, this black guy is more it should be more punished than this white guy, even though they committed the same crime, and just because this guy's black. We see that when the public hears about these court cases, we see that when the public hear about these court cases and these unjustified sentencing, this applies. The public creates this sort of kind of public pressure onto the court, and the court has more of an incentive to change their ways because people are so upset about it, right? We see that this is happening right now in status quo, where the public pushes and creates discourse towards the courts, right? Because they know that some of their sentencing are unjustified. Sure, we know that our alternative in defending status quo may take a longer time, right? But we think that our harms are less damaging in comparison to government's harms, right? Because on government, we see that because on our side, we see that not all judges are biased and racist, and this is just an assumption, right? We know that not all judges are biased. Some are, but we see that on their side, it's guaranteed that the amount of time you spend in jail, that the criminal sentencing that you have in jail is hugely based off of your race, right? And we think that this is a world that we don't want to live in, as it only enhances the amount of discrimination that we have in courts now today. With that, I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for the proposition. Now, Karen, if you're a government, would like to join you right from Deputy Prime Minister.
African Americans are severely disadvantaged from the moment they were born to the point they get that sentence at the end of the day. I think it is very difficult for us to actually make the lives of these individuals better, and I don't see how opposition will do anything to do that, especially when they say some judges are already more liberal, and the conservative ones, they will retire. I don't think retiring will solve the problem. I think that's ridiculous. I'll attack that more after this. But I think it's just important to note that the circumstances of a lot of these African Americans are ones which they cannot choose, and definitely plays a part in the circumstances they live their life. So if you have other mitigating factors like your financial status or your mental health, your mental state, for example, which are things that opposition, I assume, will support, considering they said they're okay with mitigating factors in status quo, then I do not see why this cannot extend to race as well, considering race has the same effects as all these other factors which they already accept in status quo. That clarification needed to be answered in their first speaker. Unfortunately, it wasn't. In my speech, I will prove how we can shed more light on racial abuse and sentiments within courts, and how this is a lot better in changing the way people perceive African Americans or racial minorities, and why that can get better only in the world of government. But before that, two things I'd like to respond to the speaker before me. So firstly, is this whole thing that the world is changing, right? And the reason why this problem exists is because there are judges who are old and they are conservative. So number one, I think that is something which is severely narrow, and you just narrow down the debate to just the problem being these old judges. No, that's not the problem. But even if they retire, why does that mean the problem gets solved? I think in a lot of these courts, if you're a new, I assume if you are like a new judge, you will go into court and see how these old judges kind of perform, how they interpret these sort of things, and how they carry out their duties. Therefore, I think there is a higher possibility of these like racial sentiments against African Americans to possibly trickle down to all these younger judges as well. But also, some opposition assumes that just because you're old, it means you're conservative. I think there are also younger judges who are conservative, who aren't going to retire in the next 5 years. I mean, what, you want to wait for 50, 100 years for all these people to die, then only you want to help the like African Americans? I think that's ridiculous, right? These people have suffered enough. It's about time we actually do something to help these individuals. Also, just like mentor-mentee programs, which kind of exist in a lot of these systems, I think it's just a way for like the racial sentiments to like dilute, to transcend to the younger generation as well. I don't think old people is a problem. But also secondly, they need to prove why that change can happen, the point in which that person retires, and how you tackle the like really strong narrative that a lot of these that society already has against African Americans. I don't think opposition did anything to prove why they can change that mindset. But secondly, is this idea that you should just stick to the crime and stick to that to like determine how effective the punishment is. I think there needs to be an explanation. We need to all understand that it happens in two phases. So this person is already guilty in both worlds. The debate then becomes about how do we reduce the sentence for these individuals and increase the sympathy towards these people. I think it's important for us to include race in that factor, especially if it's like principally in line with all the other factors that already exist. They didn't answer and respond to my Prime Minister. So my argument, how we can shed more light on racial abuse and sentiments. So in status quo, I think people are already racist, but it's very easy for them to disguise it in court. So for example, if an African American says I'm racially abused, it's easy for people to just say, oh no, you're being abused because you're not working hard enough, or you're being abused because you're just too vulgar in society and you make people feel unsafe. The harm of that is that you diverge the attention away from these racial issues, because race cannot be a way which you say something in court. Like race cannot be a factor in this decision-making process. And that's the problem with status quo, right? Because race does play a part in the treatment of these individuals. Race does play a part in their motives and their intentions to carry out things. So I think the point in which we shed the light on race is then it's a lot clearer that these people aren't as malicious as all of you think, and that all of you contributed to this person's crimes as well. I think that sort of attention is unique to the world of government, right? The harm of diverging attention away from all these racial issues is that means it's more difficult for you to push for any policies or any form of acceptance towards African Americans, because people don't want to listen to their racial abuse stories, because people think they're making it up. People think they're giving excuses, making race as an excuse. I think it's different, right? How do we change that very narrative? We allow African Americans to bring up race in court, which means judges, etc., are not allowed to just dismiss these very points that these individuals make, and you have to listen to them. So now in the world of government, and only the world of government, do these African Americans actually have a platform to voice out the racial abuse that they face on a daily basis. This means it is much easier for you to garner sympathy from people because now they are willing to listen. Or perhaps maybe they're not willing to, but they are forced to actually listen to you. Like if you already respect your judge, and this is someone who's very credible, I assume very experienced, right? And if this person has to listen to you, I think more people have an incentive to follow in suit of that judge and also listen to you. Like, if this judge is going to listen to this African American, why shouldn't I? Maybe I can give this person a chance as well. And I think that is when more people are more willing to listen to these racial, to these stories. I think that's a lot better for these individuals to have a victim card and definitely get sympathy from individuals. Even if, and I think this sympathy is particularly important in even outside court with your Black Lives Matter movement. Now they will be a lot more effective because more people can connect, more people can relate, more people understand the dire circumstances these individuals are in, and that's why it's so important for us to actually accept these individuals. But even if all that doesn't happen, I think African Americans don't benefit anything. I think the fact that we give these individuals a platform in itself is already a benefit. Considering these are individuals who are so deprived, a lot of people already don't want to listen to them. This means in the world of opposition, they need to internalize and suppress all that pain and stories. Or perhaps they just share it to their tiny support group. I think it's different now in the world of government. It's a lot better. We give them a legit platform in court to actually use it and see how just because you're African American, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Even if white people benefit of this system and take advantage of it, at least we take them at their best case. I think this means we have more ammunition to punish judges who are biased towards white people to begin with because they use race as an issue. And I think the comparative is in the world of opposition, if you want to change that narrative towards African Americans, it's more difficult because you don't go from the top. So this is the sort of the house that tries to change the mentality of every single person in society and somehow affect that and somehow expect that to translate into court. I think in the world of government, we do it from the top, which is a lot better because the point which your credible individuals want to listen to African Americans, more individuals are more likely to listen to African Americans. I think we make the case for these victims much better.
Here.
Okay, we have side opposition. I'd like to invite the deputies of opposition away from here. The aircon or
Yeah, sorry.
did someone help?
Is the
red button one.
sorry.
How to enter the next I think this is the share where Now, us on-site opposition agree that on-site opposition, we do not exactly create a better world for black people. It's a lot harder for black people to get. It's a lot harder for black people to get fairly fairly sentenced to their punishments. But we see that the problem with the side government's case is that we cannot accept race as a proper mitigation factor because things like economic status, things like mental health are things that can be changed over the course of life, right? And race is something that cannot. Race is something that you cannot change at all, right? And not only is that the case, but what you're doing by making race a mitigation factor is you are forcing from birth, right? Minorities are now punished less if they, for a crime that a white person may have done exactly the same things, right? Let's say a black person and a white person commit domestic violence and beat their wives to the same extent. This black person now, no matter what the circumstance, will be punished less than that white person who did the exact same thing from birth, right? And now this is something that you cannot change anymore. You cannot punish the black person any more than the white person now that it's just because of his race, just because of his skin color, just because of what the family that he was born from, right? From birth, he is already punished less, right? And we see that, yes, we on our side, we may not guarantee a better life for these black people in court. We may not reduce that prejudice, but we would rather have it stay in status quo, where you have a society which is getting progressively more and more liberal, where there is a chance of that black person there is a chance of actual fair criminal sentencing, because there isn't a guarantee that on our side that the black person will get punished more than the white person, right? We see that what government does, it takes away this fairness, this possible fairness, and just changes it into a complete unfairness, where no matter what, this black person, if committing the same crime as this white person, is punished less. If this Mexican is punished, if this Mexican and this white person are both accused for stealing, this Mexican is now punished less, right? Now from my previous speaker, right, she already told you how we acknowledge that these are legitimate problems and that need to be solved. But we believe that the harms that side government brings are a lot worse on their side than the harms we bring, where there is likely for these minorities to get punished more. But at least the possibility of fairness is there, whereas on side government it's not. Now, as on the entire premise of how government is trying to say that just because of prejudice, we need to force every single judge to give a black person less punishment than the white person. Now, we see this is a very strange thing to do, and yes, it may provide more ammunition to punish white judges who support white people more, but we see that it doesn't. For white judges who support black people more, they aren't getting attacked by black people, they aren't getting attacked by or questioned by black people who believe that this was an unfair punishment, right? It works. This is literally the vice versa. It's just that it's just flipped over now, right? We see that as a white judge, when you are now forced to give, as any judge at all, right? If you're not forced to unfairly give white person less punishment, it's completely absurd just because of the fact that now it's impossible for you to justify whether or not that person is rightly sentenced or that minority is rightly sentenced now that you're forced to just because of his skin color. Yes.
So if African Americans have suffered so much, why is it unfair for them to get a slightly lesser sentence?
Because now white people are punished even more than these minorities, no matter what, as long as they are punished on the same way, right?
how many times do I have to tell you, and how many times do my other speakers have to tell you, right? That we do agree that it's a problem, but this is definitely not the way to solve it. We on-site opposition believe that the alternative we provide, which is keeping status quo as it is, or maybe even trying to justify or get better reasoning on the changing of judges into more liberal judges is a better case than whatever they may present on their side, which involves every single minority and every single white person, right? We see that there are way better alternatives which actually do in fact create a more fairer justice system, rather than one which guarantees a minority a safer platform, or safer a guarantee that this person will be punished less than before, right? Now, these cases where these people side government may come out and tell us that, oh, but if you do not put in this motion, these people now if you rely on social pressure, which we have told you about, which will change the court, which will try to influence the decisions of these judges, right? If you rely on social pressure, then maybe these black people will just complain that, oh my god, my husband was arrested just because he was black. But we see that is not the case, right? We see that we would rather, that is the case, but we would rather have this kind of thing where we do have these cases, but we also have these cases where these minorities, where this Mexican actually did steal something, or these black people actually did commit this murder, right? We would rather have these people be properly punished and fairly, and have that possibility of these people being fairly judged on the sentence that they should rightfully get, rather than a sentence that side government wants to reduce or mitigate just because there is a possibility of prejudice and there's a possibility of unfairness in status quo, right? We say that we would much rather accept that on status quo or whatever alternative we provide, such as social pressure or just giving such as social pressure in status quo. We would much rather have that than allow judges to be forced to to provide or make decisions on sentences which they cannot otherwise, they can no longer control, right? Because being a black person may or may not have, economic status may or may economic status will change or increase the likeliness that somebody commits a crime because they are more likely to steal due to their economic status. Or people with poorer mental health are more likely to attack someone or murder somebody because of their poor mental health, right? We see that these are kind of things which can be solved because people can change their economic status by working harder, and there are alternatives rather than stealing, and people with mental health can just could get help and be helped by other people, right? Race is something that you cannot control, and this economic status and mental health isn't something that is purely based from birth and is something that can be changed, unlike race, right? Because as I've been repeating in my speech, race is because you now list race as a mitigation factor. Now these people from birth, from something they cannot control, are guaranteed an easier punishment and easier of life. Now that race is a mitigation factor, and with that, I've never been prouder to oppose.
Let's not allow the side of opposition to try to paint the side of government as the one that would actively try to make sentences way harsher for white people because we're racist. The truth is, if the range is 5 to 10 years, the individual that commits the same scale of crime as a black individual, the white individual is more likely to garner the lighter sentence end of that scale. You're likely to get 5 years, whereas the black individual, despite committing the exact same crime on the exact same scale, assuming feasible, will get that 10 years. And that's because of the existing horrible structures that currently exist within the legal system, that we don't have a check and balance when it comes to your legal sentencing in and of itself. Precisely because of the existence of these racial barriers that you need to have mitigating factors in courts to ensure that you take into account the structural things that they face in courts itself and the unfairness that they get when it comes to the legal treatment of it. I have one question for you in this debate. Where do racial minorities get access to fairer criminal justice system? But before that, let's deal with what the deputy wanted to tell us from the side of opposition. Because they very conveniently said that their side doesn't change a lot of structures for the racial minorities. But that's exactly what this debate is about. And that's exactly what the first argument from your speaker wanted to tell me. Because their argument was they will mitigate the harms of like racial abuse and stuff like that in courts because you will have your your racist, conservative, older judges retire. But their burden that they first undertook was to prove to me why eventually when they retire, somehow we'll get social change. That also means that you need to rebut that and defend your case, okay? Yeah, moving on. So also, precisely because of the existence of the lack of check and balance when it comes to ensuring that there are fair sentences given towards your racial minorities and your cis-white individuals when it comes to distributing your sentences according to your crime. This means that you cannot rely on the existing structures to have the organic change that they wanted. You can't wait for your racist judges to retire, because in the meantime, while they are still in power, you literally have control over the lives of the African American individuals that commit the crime. You have power over deciding whether or not, how long a part of their lives do they have to spend in prison, wasting their time within prison when it's unjustified to begin with. It is unfair for you to base an individual's criminal sentence upon the individual's mood or whether or not he's willing to give you a lighter sentence, whether or not he's actually racist to you. Which is why there needs to be a legal form set as a precedent to ensure that these racial minorities do get that form of justice within the system itself. But also, I think they largely misrepresented what my both speakers told you in this debate, because they wanted to say that that poor white individual that stole from a convenience store should get the same sentence as the poor black individual that sold the same thing from the same convenience store. We don't think so. I think that neglects a lot of the structural barriers that you have as a poor individual. A poor black individual suffers significantly more than a poor white individual in and of itself, because it looks like being denied jobs because of your skin color. Race plays a large part on your access towards a better life and to a life where you do not need to commit that crime in and of itself. Precisely because of the existing structures that exist when it comes to things like employment, when it comes to things like treatment on a daily basis, this means that you deserve a system that values that form of suffering. You need a system that provides you the avenue to recognize that you as a poor person suffered significantly more than that poor white person because of the lack of opportunities that race that you did not have a choice over granted you. Precisely because you did not have a choice over the race, like the side of opposition wanted to say, that means that it's principally in line with all other forms of mitigating factors that currently exist. Because things like your mental health, things like your social economic status, things like your religion are things that you do not have inherent control of. That's why we do not punish an indoctrinated individual as much as a regular individual, because we recognize that the circumstances that you're placed in the first place are not the same, which is why we always take court cases on a case-by-case basis. If they want to talk about rape and abusing your wife and stuff like that, I think the system is already disproportionate towards the black individual. We're always more lenient towards a white person that rapes. Brock Turner got 3 months off by raping a girl on college campus, but the black individual that does the same thing will probably get you 3 years at least. I think because of this inherent unfairness that exists within the system, you do need to lessen the sentence that the black individual gets inherently, because there is a lack of check and balance when it comes to giving out these sentences to begin with. This debate is not about whether or not they can change afterwards, like your socio-economic status thing that they wanted to talk about in the deputy leader of opposition, because the race thing and the mentality of people on the ground and the way they treat you as a racial minority is not something that is easily changeable. And that's the argument that came from the side of government, precisely because it's so unrealistic for us to change every single law enforcer and every single person that surrounds you. We need to have a legal system to first set a precedent that we take into account your race and we take into account the circumstances in which you were pushed into committing that very crime. Also, it's important to note that because people are inherently racist on the ground and it's very hard to control the mentality of people on the ground, it is very easy for people to disguise that racism in and of itself. this argument that came from Ayman was completely unrebutted to begin with. When he told you that it's very easy for you to dismiss the racial abuses and the extra racism that they face that led them to that crime in the first place, the point in which there is no legal proceeding that takes into account what you're saying. When you tell people in court that I couldn't get I had to steal because I really couldn't access a job as a poor African American, they're less likely to listen to you. They will downplay the sufferings that you had, the circumstances that you had to go through, because they'll be like, you're abused because you committed that crime in the first place. When the truth is, you cannot neglect the structural barriers that they have to access other alternatives towards that crime in the first place. That's the world that the side of opposition has to deal with in this debate. What is the comparative? I think under the side of government, it's way more persuasive to believe the point in which we set a legal proceeding that forces people to take into account these structural barriers. There is a much fairer treatment of racial minorities when it comes to a court by case basis when they commit a certain crime. Whereas on the side of opposition, they want to rely on people on the ground having organic change and changing, phasing out conservative individuals, when the fact is it's so speculative on whether or not an individual, your next judge will be conservative. We cannot allow the justice system to be based upon your luck on whether or not you get a conservative or a liberal judge.
Definitely now to end the evening speeches, I'd like to invite Karina to help with now put in the case for side opposition.
Now, what are both sides fighting for in this debate? Because there's something actually, because both of our sides have something in common, right? Which is to create the ideal justice system where in the future and inevitably will create a more even system where every race will be sentenced accordingly and sentenced fairly, right? Now we see that side opposition is the one that gets closer to achieving this, because essentially what side government has been saying is that, oh, in the past white people have had it easier, black people have it, minorities have it a lot worse anyways, therefore we are okay with giving white people the harsher punishments than these black people. But we see that what they are essentially doing is getting rid of that. Just by doing this, it is literally impossible for them to achieve this ideal justice system where it's fairly treated, right? Because now they're simply accepting the fact that now that they are making sentences for white criminals a lot easier than the minorities, which is getting restrained further and further away from what we are trying to achieve as an ideal justice system, right? Whereas on side opposition, what we have brought to you today, we have explained to you exactly why it is that it's possible for us to create this ideal justice system with less and less consultative judges to be put in place, and the fact that seeing in status quo that if the general public hears about these cases when minorities are unfairly punished, then at least there will be social pressure on these people for these judges to change their minds, or for these judges to be forced out of their jobs and be forced to retire. Right? We see that this is the kind of thing that us on side opposition would rather have, and we believe that this is much closer to what we believe as achieving the ideal justice system, right? Because the very fact that side government is saying that they will solve the problems of minorities in courts, solve the prejudice, sure, that may be true, but if you look at status quo and look at how society is progressing, it's becoming easier and easier, progressively easier for minorities to be getting jobs if they are unemployed. It's getting progressively easier for minority to get equal rights rather than a lot more than they did before, right? And we see that eventually, right, this prejudice may not, even in the end or even after 1,000 years, this prejudice may not exist, will probably still exist, right? But we see that it will be a lot less worse, and we see that this motion that side government has been proposing to us isn't absolutely necessary as today, because we really have no need for this right now. It's not as if black people cannot get jobs anywhere. It's not as if Mexicans are always being prosecuted just because of stealing, and even if Mexicans are getting unfairly prosecuted for for getting accused of stealing, even if they may not have done it, right? We see that these things exist, but these things are slowly changing, and with the change and with the social pressure and with the fact that there are going to be less conservative judges and more liberal-minded people, seeing as how that's how our society is progressing, right? We see that there's no point with having this motion right now, right? We see that there is the fact that the side government accepts that they will just give white people more punishment just because they have had it easier before this, is one where they accept that they cannot create an ideal justice system where these punishments are equal. It's one where they say that they don't care about having the justice system being equal because just because these white people have had it easy before, and we need to give the minorities the turn to create an unfair justice system, right? We see that on side opposition, this is much. There is the possibility of creating this ideal justice system that I talked about is much higher than the one on side government, right? And we see that with the fact that they haven't engaged with the point that they flip this. They don't solve the problem of unfair criminal sentencing. They just flip it around. They haven't engaged with this at all, and they haven't engaged with the fact that social pressure does make a change. And with that, side opposition takes the debate.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Rayful, for the reply. Now I'd like to invite Emma to end the debate.
I think ideally both sides will want a very fair justice system whereby we only look at the crime that you do and therefore decide on your punishment based on that. However, the world in which we all live in is one that is filled with prejudice, filled with racial sentiments, and I think this is a problem that needs to be addressed. I think it's unfair for opposition to kind of misread our case to be one that is focused on making it an us versus them mentality and wanting African Americans to like fight back against all these white people and make sure that all African Americans will get lesser sentences than all like your cis whites. So that is not what government will argue. We are saying that we may not necessarily get lighter sentences, like African Americans may not get lighter sentences when compared to your white individuals, but they will definitely get lighter sentences than what they're getting in status quo in the world of opposition, and that in itself is already a benefit. We would love for this benefit to extend and say that they get lighter sentences than the privileged white individuals, but I think that is like really best case. So, but I think even on like what we already argued, the fact that it's already getting better than status quo, I think that is already a benefit which opposition didn't want to deal with in this debate. So 2 questions to answer this debate. Firstly, principally, is it okay to extend the mitigating factors to race? Secondly, when is change better governance? So the first thing, with regards to principle, Prime Minister already told you that you can, like a lot of these mitigating factors are mitigating factors because you cannot choose these things. Things like your economic status, like your mental health, and therefore race is also one of those things which you cannot decide and you're kind of just given it when you're born. And the thing with all these factors is that it plays a part into the circumstances you live in and the environment you live in, which eventually push you to commit a crime or not and shape your true intentions behind a crime. That's why I think it is completely legitimate for us to extend these factors to include race as well. What the opposition say, right? The Deputy Leader of Diallo said that it's not the same because you can actually change your financial status and your mental health. I think that is something that's very simplistic. So it's not true that just by working harder, you can definitely get a better job. I think it was very clear in all 3 speeches, right, that a lot of these African Americans are structurally disadvantaged, meaning it is difficult for them to actually get a job and like simply work harder. I think opposition cannot get away by just saying, oh, you can work harder, you can change it. But also, this doesn't respond to our argument, right? So we are saying it is a mitigating factor because these are things which happens before you decide to commit the crime. So opposition cannot say, after the crime, you can choose to change it, therefore it shouldn't be a mitigating factor. Like I think they were rebutting the wrong part of the argument and it didn't tackle it whatsoever. Our principle still stands. I think we prove why it's principally okay to extend the mitigating factor to race. Second question, when is change better governance? So opposition came up with the idea that like you will have liberal judges and like organic change will somehow work. I think we just need to take a step back and realize that liberal judges is not a mutually exclusive argument. We can also have liberal judges, but the difference is, right, that on side of government, all your judges, whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal, you must listen to the racial story that this individual wants to bring up. In the world of opposition, the only people who will actually take into account the race of this person is someone who is liberal. I think they had little to no analysis to prove as to why there will be more liberal judges, especially if in my speech I told you why they are less likely to be liberal and how you cannot wait 100 years for all these conservative individuals to just retire, because in that time there'll be so much more suffering, and this suffering that opposition must defend in this debate. What did we say on changing the mentality? In my argument, I said why you shed light better on the issue and how we can actually garner sympathy, the point in which people listen to those stories. I think that form of sympathy cannot exist in the world of opposition, and that's the premise of their social pressure argument, which they didn't really explain. If you want social pressure, people must want to change. And if people don't listen in the first place, you don't get social pressure whatsoever. I think in the world of government, these individuals are better off.
Please applause, shake hands, and take for lunch on top for an hour. Thank you also to the audience members for being